Hello, welcome to another Dress Histories with me, Kate Strasdin. It's been a little while since I've done one of these. It's the summer holidays 2020, the holidays that never were. So I have been very much mum taxi and just doing teenagery type things, as well as writing. And that brings me on to the subject of what I'm going to talk to you about today, because it's one of the chapters that I've been researching and writing in recent weeks with my dress diary, which you will remember I told you about, showed you in an earlier video. So I've been looking recently at the development of printed cottons. There are lots and lots of printed cottons in Anne Sykes's dress diary, and so it forms one of the chapters that I'm writing. So I thought it would just be interesting to look today at the development of those technologies around cotton printing. Of course, it involves the trade of cotton, but predominantly the way that trade was operating and the aesthetics were operating within the East Indian trade. This is a dress from the mid-18th century. In fact, I think this one's a little bit earlier, that starts to show the fascination with chintzes, with Indian chintzes, with that printed cotton that began to replace silk as a fabric of fashion at this time. The Indian trade, the Indian chintzes, were created using the traditional techniques of woodblock printing. It was an aesthetic that can still be found in India today. I've got a woodblock. This is one that I bought in a local antique shop a couple of years ago. I don't know that this one is particularly old, particularly because of judging by the pattern, but you can see that it's a hand-carved block with a handle on the back that is used by somebody skilled who knows what they're doing in order to be able to replicate the pattern along the cloth as it moves along. So the size of the block is not necessarily that big, but you can print large pieces of fabric by repeating as you move the block down the fabric. I love this. They are quite they're quite easy to find in antique shops, and I just think they're really special things that are about the maker and the relationship of hand and object. So woodblock printing was very much the process that predominated in the 18th century. The workshops that still survive in India today follow very much the same processes. Here you can see the craftsmen at work creating these printed cottons from the hand-carved wood blocks. There was a change towards the middle to end of the 18th century that involved a different kind of material, and that was the copper sheets that were engraved with increasingly complex patterns. This is a picture of one of the copper sheets that were used to print on textiles. They would usually be sort of 36 inches square. That was the standard size at this point. So it was a larger surface area than the woodblock printing, and it did enable the pattern to appear more precise. It's a sharper, because it's engraved on metal, it had a sharper finish. Here you can see the engraver at work, and this is about subsidiary businesses, about not just the textile industry itself, but about the engravers that were employed to engrave the sheets that were then used in the textile industry. So there are all of these subsidiary crafts that often feed into the way that textiles are produced. So copper became the material of choice towards the end of the 18th century, and these sheets to a degree sped up the process of printing the cotton. But by the early 19th century, a different technique had emerged. That involved really just putting the copper cylinders, the copper plates, the engraved plates, putting them in the round, so they become cylinders. You can see here, this is actually wallpaper cylinders, so it isn't actually the textile. This wasn't for textile, so the pattern, the repeat's slightly larger. But these are vintage rollers where in the same way as the sheets were being engraved with the pattern, the engravings would be made on copper and then turned into cylinders. And you can imagine that once they're cylinders, the process of printing the cotton is sped up immeasurably. This is a picture of one of the inside of one of the calico print works in Lancashire in the 1830s, 1840s. Grand machines that of course have been enabled by the industrialisation of the machinery at this time. But the engraved copper cylinders meant that you could pass lengths of cotton through the machine, and the turning cylinders can print the cotton much, much quicker than the previously much more artisanal hand printed blocks could do. They could also build up layers, so you could have different engraved rollers would build up a pattern on the same piece of cloth. So you might have 2, 3, 4 different layers of print on one piece of cotton. That meant you could have a much more complex pattern with the overprinting. What I've been discovering with the research I've been doing is that this relates very closely to Anne Sykes because her father was involved in one of the print works in Lancashire. So a lot of the print work started off in the 18th century, 17th and 18th century along the Thames in and around London. And then as cotton became king in the north of England, coming into Liverpool, and then the mills that are opening around the different towns around Lancashire, you have the finishing services, things like the calendaring, all of the different processes that go along with that. They also relocate to around that area. So there are lots of these print works that are operating around the mill, the cotton manufacturers as well. These print works became increasingly sophisticated in the way that they produced patterns, and some of the archives that are particularly beautiful to look at are the trade pattern books. Anyone that's interested in these, this is a book by, I don't know if you can see it very well, it's a bit shiny. It's called The Secret Life of Textiles, and it's about the pattern book archives of the northwest of England. It's a survey written by Philip Sykes. Philip Sykes is a scholar who has spent very many years really investigating and understanding the contents of these pattern books and the businesses that went with them. So around a number of archives around the UK and elsewhere in the world, but he was looking particularly at the northwest of England, are trade pattern books that were created by the printworks themselves, and then they would be the books that would record the patterns, they would record colourways, different colourways. This is an example from one of those pattern books. It would give sometimes it was about, some of the books are about how you can, almost like colour recipes, so how you can create certain colours and different, doing that kind of colour experimentation. They're very special objects, but in the 1950s, when the industry started in post-war started to deteriorate and to collapse, thousands of these pattern books were destroyed. Either they were thrown into the rivers that actually fed the mills. They were no longer deemed valuable as the industry itself started to fail. Luckily, some pattern books were saved, and there are a number of them that survive in various collections, either university collections or museum collections today. So the reason I've been particularly interested in this is that, as I said, there are a number of, actually many hundreds of printed cotton samples in Anne's album, And occasionally she mentions them by name, and this has been really interesting. There are 6 samples in the book where she does actually name the printworks that they came from. The first that she talks about, and this is a picture of that, is the Broad Oak Works. Anne's brother-in-law, William Sykes, I have discovered, actually worked in the... He was a junior designer for the Broad Oak Printworks, and this is a printed cotton that he gave to his wife, Jane. I like to think that maybe it was a pattern that he designed himself, but I have no proof of that. But it's a very beautiful, complicated printed cotton that kind of pays homage to the Indian aesthetics with that butta, the paisley pattern in the repeat there. The other print works that Anne mentions by name, and again because of a personal connection, is the Primrose print works. These were based in Clitheroe in Lancashire, which is actually where Anne was born, and this is a sample that she labels as being printed at Primrose. Her father was a partner in the Primrose Printworks before he went on to become a mill owner in Tilsley. So he was very much involved in this early Primrose, I think, was one of those printworks that was very innovative. It's a cutting edge technology. I think that's worth remembering, that fashion is all about the new and seems to operate on a sort of linear line, or that's certainly the perception of it, and that everything that's new is better. But actually when you look at something like these printed cottons, the technologies were so cutting edge at the time and created such complexity in pattern, and the newness then, they're such beautiful things. So Anne was very much invested in that world, and these printed cottons were very important to her. And so this is the kind of dress that these samples actually relate to. When you see these little tiny fragments, it's easy to forget that they belonged to garments, whole garments that clothed whole bodies. This particularly lovely sample, this dress from the 1840s, would have been just the kind of dress that Anne was wearing in these beautiful complex cotton prints. So thank you, that was a whistle-stop tour through cotton printing in the 19th century, very much reflecting where I am at the moment with my research, but I hope you enjoyed, and see you again.